My name is Uri Dromi. I run the Jerusalem Press Club. This is a good opportunity to thank my able staff for helping us and your staff, Mr. Herzog. We are very pleased to host this morning a member of the Knesset, Yitzhak Herzog, who's the leader of the Labour Party and the Zionist Union. I'm not yet Jewish home. I still remember Mapai, so for me it's not easy to follow all those changes of names. No, he'll talk from here in a second. Mr. Herzog, you received his CV, so I'm giving just the highlights. Mr. Herzog joined the Knesset in 2003. And in 2013 became the chairman of the Labour Party, and then joined with Tzipi Livni of Hatnuah, making the Zionist Union the largest centrist political party in Israel. He was minister of housing, of tourism, welfare, and more. And without further ado, I'll give you Mr. Herzog.
Thank you, Uri, and I'm happy to be here at the Jerusalem Press Club. I must say, such a beautiful weather always gives you an illusion that all is calm in the Middle East. And you guys know all too well what I'm talking about. And symbolically, there's a beautiful sculpture out there of Winston Churchill overlooking us, and I always think what leadership requires to change the course of history where we're at. On Sunday, Labour Party convention overwhelmingly approved my security plan, which covers a large realm of issues pertaining to where we're at and what needs to be done. And the basis of my initiative, as well as what was approved after long deliberation of months within my party, has to do with the fact that we are in a new reality. Since the start of the new wave of terror, which is clearly a third intifada, where dozens of Israelis have been assassinated and hundreds have been wounded, and tragedy has been inflicted upon our region again, I came to the conclusion that when I look at the situation in depth, we need to refocus and readjust our paradigm in a way that, of course, doesn't lose any contact or any eyesight with the vision of the two-state solution. It's a must. It's a prerequisite to everything, definitely a prerequisite to keeping Israel Jewish and democratic, but within the current reality, when the two leaders, Abbas and Netanyahu, are there, I don't foresee any possibility of a major breakthrough or leading to the creation of a Palestinian state side by side with Israel, and therefore I've opted for certain steps that need to be taken in order to relax the situation and preserve the option of the two-state solution. And I say it after learning and studying the situation in depth on both sides, and I don't say it out of despair, but out of realpolitik. I've been at Abu Mazen's in August. He alerted me on the possibility of a third intifada. I called upon him to prevent it as much as possible. I called upon Netanyahu to prevent it as much as possible, and the reality crashed in front of our eyes. And therefore, in order to prevent an imposed solution on the parties, which would be adverse to the interests of Israel, and which I object to, of course, we must initiate. And my plan is the only plan around. No other party or leader has presented a plan that is realistic. And what does the plan include? First of all, to separate between Palestinians and Israelis as much as possible. That means completing the security fence around the settlement blocks. For example, in around Gush Etzion and southern Mount Hebron. Wherever there are needs, wow, that's noise is, what do we do with this noise? I hope we will, yeah. Sorry. In Jerusalem is surrounded by 28 Palestinian villages. Villages, I'm not talking neighborhoods, villages that are definitely not what the vision of Jerusalem as we have entailed it throughout the generations is all about. Right now, I'm not going into the political solution, but I'm going into the issues covering security, where we need to reinstate or instate further separation between the villages and the city itself, because as you look at it per se, you see youngsters coming and stabbing. This is what the reality is all about. Thirdly, confidence-building measures or giving more authority to the Palestinian Authority when it comes to civilian issues, as was requested by the international community and by the American administration, including recently from Prime Minister Netanyahu, in the areas beyond the fence. And lastly, convening a regional security conference that will converge the interests of all moderate parties in the region together with Israel in foreseeing the new configuration in the Middle East, in handling the threats from Iran and ISIL, and try to bring to the table both Palestinians and Israelis to see how we can move on from here. Now, our resolution in the party, which we will hand out to you, covers many more than that. It also covers other issues, and you can see it for yourself. Just want to point out so that you know what we are talking about. We call upon trying to find ways and means of easing up the situation in Gaza by way of demilitarization versus development of the Gaza Strip, of course, combating terror and preventing terror, including the tunnels, and finding ways and means that Gaza must be part of the solution, bringing the Palestinian Authority into Gaza. We speak of security as the primate objective right now, because once you have security and once you calm down the situation, you can move again to a process which is pragmatic and real and is tangible. May I point out to you two precedents of this nature following the Yom Kippur War? What led to the agreement with Egypt at the end, which Begin and Sadat signed, was the disengagement agreement, which was signed after months of negotiations between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Syria, which of course separated the two armies and enabled, I would say, a certain buffer. What here, the reality is more complicated, but definitely anywhere that we can stop movement of terrorists is what we need right now in order to calm the situation. And lastly, we say that when the day comes for final status negotiations, and may I say that I believe that had I been Prime Minister, we would have been in a different area altogether. We will resume the talks on the basis of the Clinton parameters of 2000, amended by plans, agreements, and the understandings of the past, including ideas that were, of course, presented both by Mrs. Livni in the past in her negotiations and plans such as the Chilik Bar plan. In any case, in a final status agreement, Israel would be recognized as the nation state of the Jewish people and Palestine as the nation state of the Palestinian people. And we've also agreed unanimously in the conference that permanent status agreement will be brought to a national referendum. But let me just conclude and say the following. We had a heated debate in our party, and I believe that we have to be realistic. And I believe that reality calls right now to understand that tomorrow peace is not around the corner. What needs to be done is separating from the Palestinians as much as possible. This is taking our fate in our own hands. And I've heard the Prime Minister speak about fences yesterday. Well, there could be two options. Either Netanyahu wants to become Herzog, definitely a few days following the Labour Party conference, or Netanyahu wants a fence in a certain area but does not want to determine the final borders of the State of Israel or tell our people, the people of Israel, what's his plan, and how does he readjust the direction that we should take as I've adjusted it towards my camp. And I think this raises many queries and questions that need to be asked from the Prime Minister. Definitely we will focus about it in the debate which is expected in the Knesset this afternoon on the same issue, on the issue of the future of the two-state solution. So in conclusion, we are committed to the two-state solution. This is our vision for the future. However, realistically speaking, peace is not around the corner, and the possibility of reaching the two-state solution right now in the current political situation and the situation on the ground where the two peoples are in one of the worst peaks of animosity and hate. We should move towards steps that calm down the situation, lead to separation, and bring much more security so that from there on we can move hopefully back by way of preserving the two-state solution. Thank you all very, very much. And Uri, you direct the questions.
Short questions, yes. Yes, are you wait for the mic.
And just say where you're from and who you are.
Tova Lazaroff from the Jerusalem Post. Just so I'm clear, are you saying that the barrier, once completed around the blocks, would then be Israel's new border?
I didn't say that. I said these are security steps. All I'm saying is that we present an agenda for a long time saying where we foresee, where we envision. In general, we've adopted the settlement blocks versus swap idea long ago. And I've said it including during the elections, and I say it repeatedly that for me, Gush Etzion should be part of Israel just as Tel Aviv. I'm adamant about it. However, this has to be reached by way of an agreement or by way of a political solution between us and the Palestinians, which is supported by the international community. There are opportunities now that enable to lead to reinforcing this idea, but right now what I'm calling upon is a security step, namely finalizing the border, finalizing the security fence around the blocks. In Gush Etzion, it's an open area. The fence hasn't been completed for political reasons, which are obscure, and in other areas as well. And we should take all steps necessary. I've gone to cemeteries, I've gone to Shiva calls, I've spoken to families. I speak to many Israelis. Israelis are perplexed. They've lost their sense of security and sense of confidence. They've lost a sense of confidence in Mr. Security. There is another alternative. I'm presenting the only viable alternative to bring, to lower the flames and move forward by way of preserving the two-state solution. Please.
Jean-Michel Rickner, Interpress. How do you see...
Sorry, which newspaper?
Interpress.
Okay. Yes.
How do you see the situation in Jerusalem? Do you think there would be a barrier to separate from the Arab population?
What I'm saying about Jerusalem is for a long time that we have to be realistic about the situation in Jerusalem. Right now I'm talking about a security step, but a step that is quite new and I would say changing certain paradigms. And it's interesting that we had a poll done on the plan, and the idea that there will be a barrier around 28 villages that encompass the Jerusalem municipal area as part of the Jerusalem municipal area. where Isawiya or Shuafat, a refugee camp, are deemed part of Jerusalem is ridiculous. There is no real connection. And more importantly, some of the tragedies that have been inflicted in recent months have come because there were no barriers on the way. None of us like barriers. Nobody likes barriers, and nobody likes fences. But at the end, we need to preserve the life of people here against cruel terror, which is unacceptable by any norms, which is inflicted upon us again, which leads to enormous pain, which none of the peoples are willing to accept, in a vicious cycle that doesn't end. And you know what? It reminds me of the debate on the security barrier and fence before it was erected. It was the same discussion. And when it was erected, it brought down the suicide bombing by 100%. Please.
Raphael Aaron from the Times of Israel. Two quick questions. One is just a clarification. I'm not sure I understood what you meant when you were speaking about the Prime Minister touring the eastern border yesterday with Jordan, when he talked about encircling the country with borders. You said maybe he wants to be Herzog. Maybe you can explain your position on Netanyahu's border policy with the East.
I have no problem with the border policy on the East. All I'm saying is that if Netanyahu once spoke about fences, he should also deal with the fence that separates between us and the Palestinians. And definitely should answer questions on that as well. Because if you want to prevent the immediate danger, the immediate risks, deal with Palestinian terror that has been inflicted upon Israelis day in, day out, in a way that needs to be dealt with, and in our mind hasn't been dealt with sufficiently.
My actual question was about, there was just a clarification. My actual question is about Yair Lapid and his Bar Ilan 2 and his peace plan. You said that yours is the only one that's realistic.
In terms of pragmatic solutions to the wave of terror, okay? Not in terms of long-term vision. Everybody has long-term vision. Nobody is telling the truth to the Israeli people. Nobody is telling the truth to the Israeli people that this situation cannot go on and should not go on, and we should not accept in any way the reality that plague is on our houses again, but rather try to prevent it. And when you study it in depth and you see the new wave of terror, you realize that only by preventing people from interacting for a while at least, until you calm down the situation, will you be able to preserve the two-state solution. And definitely, the parties on the right and the leaders on the right have no answer. I've heard Uri Ariel, I've heard Bennett, they want to annex Area C. What will Area C bring us? Will it bring peace, or will it bring upon us more terror of individual Palestinians? Will it include 200,000? 100,000 ID holders in Israel, Palestinians? What's the connection between them and the state of Israel? We should be realistic. We should be bold. We should answer the challenges. And I've been saying it to Netanyahu from the day this government was created. And I said that I'm not willing to live on the paradigm of thou shalt live on your sword. However, whatever I envisioned unfortunately happened, and yet I believe that because of it we should take steps, even if they are unpleasant or against our vision of living together each under his fig tree. It's not realistic, and let's stop playing games, and let's start to separate the two peoples until we can move on to implement a two-state solution.
Good morning, Piotr Smoller from Le Monde. Two very short questions. First, 58,000 Palestinians work in Israel. The army wants to bring 30,000 more. 28,000 work in the settlements. Do you want to separate with all those Palestinians as well?
No. All I said that when it comes to employment, it will be supervised as needed with the permitting and everything. This is something that you supervise. It's not a 17-year-old getting up in the morning, walking to another neighborhood and stabbing a 16-year-old.
Second short question. You mentioned...
That's why I also, one of the reasons, apart from anything else, which I object vehemently to boycott calls on Israeli products from the territories is that the ones who will pay the price first and foremost will be Palestinians employees who enjoy full labor benefits and social benefits and work well and bring bread home, and they will be the first ones to suffer from these types of boycotts.
You mentioned a regional conference.
Regional security conference.
So that would be totally different from, for example, the French suggestion of an international conference.
Well, I've mentioned this issue was discussed when I was in Paris. What I want to explain is the following. There is a unique regional situation, unique by all circumstances of history. It's a unique opportunity. You have moderate states. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. You have immediate neighbors of Israel, Egypt and Jordan. Egypt, Jordan, and Israel together are a strong security fist, which has a huge influence on the region. Add to it possible partners in the discussion on security challenges in the region, from Saudi Arabia, the Gulf, the Palestinian security organizations, which we call upon in our plan to enhance and strengthen the cooperation, of course, with them against terror, as well as other nations such as Morocco and so forth, and the periphery. And you have a possibility of convening everybody to a room to identify the new configuration in the Middle East when the Iranian tiger is walking out of the cage, looking around, sniffing, and seeing what's next, the challenges of Syria, and of course ISIS as the huge challenge of the era in many forms and ways. This brings people together. This is a convergence of interest. And add to it issues of military dimensions, intelligence dimensions, strategic dimensions, and of course add to it the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this can serve as a basis of bringing the parties into a room. Right now it's unfeasible. Netanyahu and Abu Mazen, if they, God forbid, shook hands in the climate conference in Paris, immediately they had to apologize and explain, God forbid, how that was done. It's ridiculous. It doesn't give any answer to what Israelis need in this present moment. And I believe also what Palestinians need in this present moment.
Okay.
Mike Smith from AFP News Agency. One, you're saying that it's not feasible right now to have any kind of breakthrough in discussions, but a lot of Israelis might say that Abbas is sort of the last best hope on the Palestinian side to have a negotiating partner, and what comes after him may in fact be much worse. So I wonder what your thoughts on that are, and also by further isolating these communities, don't you feel you would worsen the problem in some ways, the so-called intifada, and I guess some might point to Gaza as an example?
First of all, Gaza is a tragedy of humongous magnitude because it's been taken over by Hamas, and you know exactly the situation, except that I don't believe that if we want to move to a two-state solution, we should have a three-state solution. We should come forward with a solution to Gaza. I mentioned it. And there has to be a political solution to Gaza whereby the Palestinian Authority comes in. I don't believe in the fact that Israel will negotiate with two Palestinian states. So even if there's love lost, okay, between the two leaders of the two peoples, what do we do with Gaza? It has to be, in our mind, a prerequisite to a final status agreement. Now, with respect to remind me your first question.
You said it's not feasible with Abbas.
Right, wait. Now, I'm not here to give marks to Abbas. All I'm saying is that in the present reality, if one looks at the situation where, on the one hand, if you look at it objectively, both leaders are unwilling to take the necessary bold steps to get to a breakthrough. One is locked in within his party and coalition partners who basically prevent him from doing even minimum steps that are required. And the other meets with families of murderers and assassins who've killed innocent citizens, including citizens from all quarters of life in Israel who, some of them, as you know, were peace lovers all their life. Not that it really matters. All I'm saying is something in the rhetoric, in the behavior. I look at what the White House said in May, where they do not project the possibility of reaching an agreement this year. Or what Tony Blair said as the quartet representative in the Haaretz conference. And when I look at it objectively, yes, I would have wanted very much to move towards a two-state solution. But right now, under the present circumstances, let's take steps to calm down the pressure, the pain, the terror, in order to preserve that option in the future.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Ulla Tide from the...
Then we'll do something from the right here.
No, we did.
Yes.
We're keeping a balance.
I'm Ulla Tide from the German news magazine Focus, and my question is: have you already talked to Arab countries, and do you think of other countries besides Jordan and Egypt?
Look, my plan creates interest within the diplomatic world. I've presented it at length at the Elysee. I presented it to Secretary Kerry last week in Rome at length. In a long meeting, I've spoken to foreign ministers and leaders around the world. As opposed to all the criticism, I had a landslide in my party conference supporting it because my party epitomizes the general feeling of Israelis who dream about peace, who follow the route of Yitzhak Rabin, and yet they want to correspond with the current reality. With respect to countries which everybody knows about, the moderate countries in the region that we are talking about, apart from Jordan and Egypt, we know and we realize that the Sunni nations in the region, including the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and Morocco and other nations, can be part of a grand coalition which definitely creates a balance, a new balance in the Middle East, something which is of great importance to world stability.
Yes, please.
Raf Sanchez from the Daily Telegraph. Mr. Herzog, you said a moment ago that you were opposed to a boycott on products from made in the Palestinian territories. Jeremy Corbyn, your fellow Labour Party leader in the UK.
He's not my fellow. He's not my fellow. He's the Labour Party leader in Britain. He's not my fellow Labour Party leader.
Well, that speaks to my question. He supports such a boycott. He supports an arms embargo. He talks about friends in Hamas and Hezbollah. I wonder, are you alarmed by these views? Do you feel any international solidarity?
I think it's a naive approach that doesn't understand the reality in the region, that doesn't understand the reality in the world as such. And when one sees the ISIL phenomena as a phenomena of revolutionary nature, based upon the awakening of young people who are brainwashed and attracted to this new phenomena, which undermines the world order and morality, one needs to understand that naive approach against those winds that lead to a conflict of civilizations in the worst circumstances of it is an unrealistic approach, and therefore clearly I beg to differ deeply with Mr. Corbyn on this issue.
Now we make a big leap to the right.
I'm Walter Bingham, Israel National Radio, which is in fact Arutz Sheva. You said that if you were Prime Minister, we would be at a different place now. But it takes two to tango. Would you not agree with me that many previous attempts to negotiate for a two-state solution failed? Several prime ministers tried it, and that it is in fact the other side that's not interested in a two-state solution. And the prime minister said they don't want to build a state, they want to destroy one.
What I meant was that I believe that I would have changed the atmosphere. I think a lot has to do with psychology. I cannot tell you whether one would be able to reach the two-state solution or whether definitely would I be able to reach. I never said it. I said I can't commit to it. I definitely believe in trying. But meanwhile, I came to the same conclusion, not as you explain it, but to the conclusion that the present circumstances following the wave of terror we need to take other measures. All I spoke about during my campaign was that I believe that there are steps that could have been taken that would have eased up the pressure and would have created a better atmosphere around the two peoples and their leadership. And it calls a lot for bold steps, but measures that some of them are very pragmatic and very realistic. And unfortunately, the government of Israel hasn't taken them or hasn't delivered them as opposed to what was called for. Also the Palestinians. Look, the Palestinians, as you know all too well, and definitely Abbas, there are steps that were not taken by them, and there have been issues that have been extremely disappointing to many, many people who supported the process. So having said that, this is our plan, as was presented to you.
Yes, please.
Elias Levy from the Spanish news agency. I wanted to ask you whether these security steps that you are proposing as an initiative, okay, if you have given a thought to the fact that when Israel launch unilateral steps, and these unilateral steps generally are related to security issues, Israel used to end in a worse situation than before. Have you coordinated that with the Palestinians?
This is a very important question, and the resolution. And what I didn't mention was, of course, that I'm not pulling out. Under the current plan, we're not withdrawing from settlements. The Israeli military, IDF, will stay wherever it needs to be. It will stay. Between the sea and the Jordan, only the Israeli army will be. It will be the only army. We've learned the lesson of the Likud pullout from Gaza. Definitely learned the lesson, and as such, we made it clear that the Israeli Defense Forces will stay in the area fully until one reaches amicable peace.
Starting to wrap up, yes.
Yes, I'm from Naive Sweden, Swedish radio, and I have two questions. One, do you share the Israeli government's criticism and perhaps dislike of Sweden? Secondly, would Bernie Sanders be good for Israel?
With respect to Bernie Sanders, there's a rule that will not trespass or cross. We will not comment on any candidate or take any position within the American political competition and elections. With respect to Sweden, it's a tricky question. You already framed it as if it's Israel versus Sweden. We have a lot in common with Sweden. I'm a social democrat by conviction, and we always envy Sweden for things it has done. I know your leadership as well. Somehow it always boils down to social democratic parties. But I had heavy criticism on what Foreign Minister Alstrom said. Heavy criticism, and I made it clear. From the outside, it's really easy to criticize and to say things that are so detached from reality, so detached from reality. But when I invite you, I know you guys are covering the story of Israel in depth. I went to the family of Yaakov Don in Gush Etzion. I go to many, unfortunately, all these parents and families, and they say to you, there's no animosity. They just want answers. They want to know. People want to know what can be done. Until it strikes you, you don't understand it even. So I go to family Yaakov Don. He was studying in Haifa University education. He definitely, in my mind, was mainstream Israeli. Sits there his mother, Malka. And she's an Auschwitz survivor. And his father is Buchenwald. And she talks to me about that she was a kindergarten teacher in Jerusalem and then in Kiryat Ono, in secular towns. And I tell her, Malka, how much poison can you drink in life? How much poison? And then you hear Shlomit Dickman was murdered in a supermarket, and her grandfather, another Holocaust survivor. And you go to families and you talk to them. And I went to the funeral of Daphna Meir. Again, a nurse. all the doctors, Arabs and Jews, adored her. She did only good. I bet you, I mean, all I can say is the following. Her husband said that she voted for Shimon Peres. Which means that, again, all these stereotypes about Israeli communities is so distorted. Israeli communities are asking questions and debating, and this is the beauty of our democracy. And all those Israel haters and bashers have no idea about the story of this place. Never had, will never understand. And therefore, to come and give us grades and marks out there from the parliament in Sweden was a major mistake. It doesn't help peace, doesn't show any objectivity in understanding the pains of human beings. And in this respect, I definitely felt a lot of anger and frustration when I heard these comments.
Yeah, Tova from the Jerusalem Post again. When you talk about completing the barrier, do you mean along its current route? And second, if the international...
Tova, nobody knows what the current route is. There's a whole political turmoil about the route.
It was voted on and there's a map. The last cabinet vote.
So why hasn't it been implemented?
So would you amend it? Are you talking about an amended route or the current route?
We are seeing lots of routes and lots of ideas, but it's got to be completed. And we call upon the government to make sure that it is completed. With respect to this track or that, you know, it has also legal implications and so forth.
And if the international community declared it illegal in the West Bank in 2004, why would it be sympathetic to it now?
Because I think the international community realized that it stopped terror dramatically. And in fact, it actually led to the ability to try again and again and again in the last 12 years and so forth to reach the two-state solution. Once there's less terror, there's more ability to talk. Yes, final Gil.
But and then that gentleman next to me. I want to put together three different things you said, or have said, having heard you speak about 20 times over the last 2 weeks. Number one, that the public supports your plan. 65% of the public supports your plan. Number two, had you been elected, would it be different? You even suggested there wouldn't be an intifada. And number three, that you've believed what you've been saying in this plan for a long time, including way before the election.
No, I didn't say that. Where did you hear me say that? Neither did I say it here.
There are
some I said it in my speech at the conference that after viewing and seeing and meeting families and thinking about it in depth and discussing with people, and I had my deliberations, hesitations, and talks with many people, I came to the conclusion recently, of course.
So there was nothing you could have done to bring some of this out before for the people of Israel so they would maybe elect someone different and prevent?
Something dramatic changed. If you guys think that the new intifada is something that's of not great importance, I heard Tzachi Hanegbi say today, oh, that's just a little security problem. There are much greater problems in the region. Then that's a huge mistake. In my mind, this is a very, very dramatic development that needs to be attended to, and Israelis are calling for answers. And you know what? It affects the life of Israelis and Palestinians all the time in enormous I would say angles of life. It affects their business, it affects their ability to feel at ease, it affects their education, it affects the national morale, it affects a lot of things. And we could prevent it.
Mr. Herzog, Juan Carlos Sanz from the País newspaper. And have you got a map of the final barrier, separation with the Palestinians? This barrier will be the final one, definitely, or you can move it, you can swap it.
I didn't say it's the final border. I said it's a security fence. I didn't say it's a final border. One needs to understand, however, that at the end it's something that separates between Israelis and Palestinians. And yes, the settlement blocks paradigm has been there since the Clinton parameters of December 2000. This is the only viable option at the end to reach an amicable solution whereby 80% of the settlers or so will be included within those blocks, of which comprise of 4% of the land in dispute, which for swap of land is feasible. This is all there since December 2000. Thank you all very, very much.
Before you leave us, Mr. Herzog, I want to give you a membership card of the press club here. You will be pleased to know that one of your predecessors in receiving it was Michael Bloomberg, so maybe it gives some luck. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. תודה רבה.